Alrighty, welcome to The Cutting Edge with Dr. Lee Pearson and Dr. Robert Stubblefield. And our topic today is concepts of consciousness. And did we have any preliminaries with
Yeah, we got a couple of preliminaries before because after all, we're talking about a chapter in Introduction to Objective Epistemology, a difficult chapter. Why are we starting as it were midstream, and why are we reading this? There are many reading groups out there on the internet and off the internet reading all kinds of chapters and all kinds of essays and things, and some of them are quite good. So what do we do in reading another chapter? Well, to make it cutting edge, we have some underlying agendas here, or at least I do anyway. Well, actually, so does Bob. One of them is I want to illustrate a little bit about what I call focused comprehension, and use our efforts here to illustrate the technique of focused comprehension, which is part of what I call focused thinking. And I'm just going to give you a little sense of it now. I'm a little dribble. Little dribs and drabs as we go along, but I'm not going to do a whole lecture right now. But the basic idea is because of the way automatization works, of developing skill. If you want to reliably go beyond what comes to mind automatically, what you've automatized, if you want to get past that, you have to get specific in your intentions. You have to refocus your attention specifically on the right content. That is to say, on key concepts in context. And that's what I teach, how to do that, how to identify and refocus your thinking specifically so that you can go beyond what comes to mind automatically. And I can explain that a little more later, but I think I'll settle for that now. I just want to say that the most basic skill involved there is identifying what the key concept that you should refocus, identifying that key concept. And that skill, I believe, is a form of introspection. It's introspection on thinking. And introspection on thinking, in my opinion, is the most important cognitive skill not taught in school, any school, anywhere, at any level. Explicitly. It may be taught. Good teachers may convey how they do that to their students in a non-formal way, but it isn't formally taught. So I want to give you some idea. And focused comprehension has a couple of characteristics, well, several. I'll just mention a couple of them. One of them is if you want to go beyond what comes to mind automatically when you're reading, you want to identify the key concepts, which are the ideas that might slip by too quickly in your thought process. Before you've processed them enough, before you activated enough knowledge about them, it's very easy because of how automatized our reading processes are for things to slip by, important things to slip by too quickly. And you want to identify those things. And there are various ways you can do it. I'm going to just mention one important thing now before we get started. And that is, as you read or as you do any other cognitive process, in my opinion, you should be on the lookout for inklings. That's the word I like to use for this. Feelings about thoughts. Feelings about the progress of thought, which these feelings run from aha, which is when you have a good idea, or eureka if it's a really good idea, and all the way down to uh-oh, and a feeling that's sort of like a rock in your shoe, that we call stinklings, the bad feelings that tell you that there's something needs to be repaired in your thought process, or you need to activate some further knowledge that you haven't activated automatically. You need to bring something into your thought process that wasn't already there, and that will enable you to make further progress. Anyway, there's much more to say about that, but in reading, I'm saying while you read, you ought to be attending to your feelings about how about your cognition. Are you getting it or not? And if you're not getting, if you have the feeling, which is kind of like, it's hard to describe, because we don't have the right concepts of consciousness to describe this stuff. That's one of the problems. Concepts of consciousness is that we don't have enough of them, and resort to all kinds of metaphors with the physical world. And that's not bad, but someday it will be improved. But for now, I'm making a comparison with a rock in your shoe. You feel a rock in your shoe, and that's something wrong, and you know there's something wrong, but you don't know quite what it is. That's a signal from your, as it were, your subconscious, from your brain to your mind, telling you, please refocus me. Please focus more narrowly on the specific issue that's causing trouble. So you have to, in order to do that, you have to identify that. So anyway, paying attention to inklings is important for all cognition and certainly for good comprehension. And when I use the term comprehension, I'm referring not only to reading, which we're doing today, but also to listening to a lecture or listening to a friend, any kind of comprehension. And that, in fact, that is also, comprehension is also fundamental in any kind of problem solving, argument analysis, or decision making. So we're talking about a very fundamental cognitive skill here. So we're going to look out for inklings. The other thing, there are a number of things we could be doing, but I'm going to stress two. One is looking out for paying attention to inklings and following up on them and analyzing a little bit more of the key concepts than you might do automatically. The other thing that I recommended to students for years and years is to consolidate your grasp of difficult material when you're reading difficult material. It's not a bad idea, unit by unit, and units would normally be something like a paragraph, but they could be smaller or larger, but usually a paragraph, that you stop and paraphrase in your own words the gist of what you read, preferably in one sentence. And I've taught this for years, but I found out that Bob has been doing this for centuries, maybe even, or for, I don't know how long. Anyway, he does it himself. So, that verifies that we have a useful process here, that it's you want to consolidate. If you can state the gist of something briefly in your own words, that's a good indicator that you've got a understanding, if your gist is valid, of course. So you try to do that. So I find, how often do I do that? Well, I use inklings again. As I read, if it's difficult material, and boy, this chapter on concepts of consciousness, I think qualifies as difficult material. If it's difficult material, I get a feeling, my feeling, it's sort of as if my head is filling up with stuff, and there reaches a point where it feels like if I read one more sentence, the material will overflow, overflow off the top of my head, and I'll lose control of it. When I'm starting to reach that point, that's a good time to say, let's step back for a moment and paraphrase the gist, which tends to drain your brain, and then you can sort of go on from there. So that's basically the idea as I see it. Bob may want to add on to that. And
actually, I would like to add on, not to that, but as an instruction for anybody who happens to be watching this.
Yes.
That they ought to go get a copy of Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology and turn to chapter 4, which is the Concepts of Consciousness chapter. And if they do not yet have a copy, they ought to get on Amazon right now and buy one.
Get it on Kindle.
And they can start looking at it before we're through talking.
That's right. Kindle will send it to you. Unlike other things these days, Kindle, I think, is still instantaneous. Still sends things right away, I think.
Yes.
So that's right. Sure. You can get a copy of, now we are only going to put up on screen the paragraphs that happen to be reproduced in the Ayn Rand lexicon on the internet, Harry Binswanger's lexicon on the internet. So we're going to only do that. But that, of course, those are highly selected paragraphs. So that's actually pretty good. And we may not be able to, we'll see how it goes. We may not be able to get through much more than that, if even that. So we have a good piece to bite on there, but it's better if you have the material in front of you, of course. This is a difficult chapter. Now, what's motivating us to start this with this chapter, aside from its inherent interest? To me, for example, I'm a psychologist. Of course, concepts of consciousness are fundamental. But also we want to establish further context for a further discussion of what we've been talking about before, about the nature of the subconscious. So, in the past, I have been maintaining that the subconscious is a physical existent. It's the I've been maintaining. See, this is why we have a discussion. You see what's going on down there. So I've been maintaining it's a physical existent We know that with absolute certainty from science, but well, almost absolute certainty. I mean, there's some debate, I guess. Anyway, it's a physical existence, brain and body. The exact nature of it, we don't know, because what it does is it produces, it gives rise to conscious experience. And I think we know pretty well that neural processes proximately in proximate causation give rise to neural experience. And they also, again, I'm searching for the words because we don't have the right words, but I'm going to say store our memories of conscious experience, and that process and the existent that is involved there is a physical existent, unlike consciousness. It's very different from consciousness. Anyway, we've discussed this at a previous session, but these things need to be deepened, and Bob has more to say, and I think this chapter will give him more to say. I don't think I need more, but I think he thinks he needs more to say, and will come from this chapter. So our discussion should give us that. I doubt we will reach that discussion this week. It'll probably be, to be continued in a couple of weeks. We'll see how things go, but I think that's probably fair to say. Okay, and I think for me, those are the preliminaries. Anything else you want to say now, Bob?
No.
Steve? You got any? You're not, I can't hear you, Steve.
No, I don't want to
okay.
interject here.
So should we just go ahead and flash the first paragraph on the screen? Should we go ahead and do that? Would you like me, by the way, would you like me to read it aloud? Would that be okay?
Yes.
And then, by the way, you can stop me at any point, and I will stop myself at any point, but you can stop me at any point, either of you. Okay, here we go. All right. So this is from Concepts of Consciousness and Introduction to Objectives to Epistemology, page 29, which is an early page, if not the first. And it says, extrospection. Now, I'd probably just stop a second there, because that's a kind of unfamiliar term. It's to be, I think, defined in contradistinction to introspection, but it's actually the more fundamental term. It's awareness of things external to consciousness. Let me just put it that way. That's probably not, we could probably say more, but I'm going to go on. Is a process of cognition, and I'm going to just stop on cognition for a second. Cognition is understanding in consciousness. It's conscious understanding. The modern cognitive psychology does not understand that, but that's another subject. So I will go on from there. Cognition.
Before you go on,
yes, sir.
The context is, this is the third sentence in the third paragraph.
Okay, we actually do have the first sentence further down somewhere. So, let me see. Maybe, Steve, you want to try to see if we can go to, can you flip down a couple of pages on this, on what you're sharing? Because I can recognize where that first sentence is. And Bob's right, this is not the actual first sentence. So maybe we should try to do it in that order. I'm glad
this is the 20.
You want to flip
page
a
29.
Page? Yeah. Well, go down a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay, the formation, that's not it. Go ahead, another one, next one. Next one.
Yeah, well, the one before showed it.
The one before.
Number 3, okay.
Now it says
The
it's
first
page
sentence
37.
there is the first paragraph.
Yeah, it says there, it says page 37, doesn't it? I wonder, but that is, that first sentence is the first sentence of the whole thing, isn't it?
Correct.
All right, so we've just discovered that the lexicon is a little bit out of order.
It went to a different edition, maybe.
Yes, 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 they may well have done that, which is going to. All right. So why don't we start here? We said a little bit about extrospection and cognition, and that's not a bad thing. I don't mind starting with, I don't know, the actual first sentence starts with awareness, but I'm just going to start at the top anyway. Consciousness is the faculty of awareness, the faculty of perceiving that which exists. Now, I'm gonna, what I have an inkling about in this one sentence is the word faculty, and I have an inkling partly because there's a whole history in psychology of the use of this term, but I should just ignore that for our purposes. I will just mention here that when we speak of consciousness, sometimes we're speaking of the faculty of consciousness, which is, I'm talking about an objectivism. The faculty of consciousness, which is not only awareness as such, but everything that supports and gives rise to awareness, including all those neural processes, including the subconscious, whatever that happens to be, is part of the faculty, part of the whole functioning unit, you might say. Whereas awareness refers to, as the philosophers say, what is it like to be something? You feel your feelings, your ideas, your emotions, your pains, your sensations, all of that stuff, which is hard to describe. Some philosophers use the term qualia for that stuff, but that's rather inexact or not entirely satisfying. But experience, conscious experience, is what we mean by awareness normally. But sometimes when you use consciousness, it may refer to that and may refer to the faculty, which is broader. And then the faculty of perceiving that which exists, I have a little inkling that stopped me on the word perceiving, because when I use that word, I mean sense perception. It's based on the pickup of structured information in stimulation. Whereas Ayn Rand sometimes uses, and would be the case here, uses perceiving in a broad sense of generalized awareness of any kind. And I think that's what we have here. She's not restricting, she does not intend to restrict consciousness. She does not intend by this sentence to restrict consciousness to sense perception. You would agree with that, wouldn't you, Bob?
Oh, I agree with that. I would like to disagree with faculty, though.
Okay, go ahead.
You included what makes consciousness possible as part of the faculty. And I would exclude that. I would say the faculty really, it's a synonym for the mind in this case. The faculty of perceiving that which exists, consciousness, the faculty of awareness. What we're talking about is the mind, mental things.
Do we have some, given that this term has been used and badly in psychology, do we have a reference that would make that clear somewhere?
Well, how about the analogy of the faculty of sight? And the faculty is implemented by eyes and pupils and rods and cones, all kinds of other things. But if you're just focusing on what sight is, you're omitting all those other things.
Well, again, I probably wouldn't. First of all, again, I'm personally loath to use the term in that connection. I just don't like it. It has too many bad connotations, and it's a little too vague. I think it's a little too vague. But I would use the faculty of sight to include everything that goes into the functioning of visual perception, the functionality of visual. I would take the term to be a reference to the whole functional unit. But I don't know, and I'm just asking: do we have this is a matter of usage, and do we have a quote somewhere that that might clarify this? I don't know. Let's go ahead. I actually think it's not going to be crucial, but I personally would. It wouldn't bother me at all if the term faculty disappeared from the language. I wouldn't be hurt in the slightest, and I don't think anything else would be hurt in the slightest. But let's maybe that, let's go ahead. We'll see. But unless there's a specific quotation somewhere, I think we don't. It's a little left a little bit vague. Well, let's go ahead. Can we go ahead, Bob? Can I go ahead?
Well, not quite.
No. Okay. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
If you drop faculty from this, then what is consciousness?
Well, consciousness is what we call. It's the difference. Let me put it this way: it's the difference between being awake and in non-dreaming sleep. When you're awake and you feel pains and see things and experience things, that's consciousness. When you are asleep and you're not dreaming, let's forget dreaming for a moment because that's complicated. But when you're not dreaming, you're unconscious. When somebody says you're unconscious, it means that you're not aware. You're not having awareness. So that's what I would that would be my go-to. You can't define consciousness because it's axiomatic. There's no broader genus. You have to kind of point to it, but you know what it is because you have it. At least I'm pretty sure you do, Bob. So that's how you know. And these distinctions between conscious and unconscious are valuable in giving one a sense of what it is. So there's a difference between being awake and asleep.
Well, is memory part of consciousness?
Well, see, like many terms, we have these problems. Boy, we're gonna have a long. It's gonna be a tough slog, isn't it? Through it.
Oh yeah.
Which is good. This is good because this is important stuff and it's difficult and we have to do it. The term memory, like many such terms, is equivocal. Sometimes people, when they talk about memories, are talking about conscious experience. When I remember that I went to school at William McKinley Elementary School in Burbank, California, and I can imagine Mrs. Simmons and some of the students and stuff, and that's conscious memory. Memory can also refer to, the, and again, I don't think this is the right word, but I'm going to use it for lack of a better one, but I don't really like it. The storage of those conscious of something related to those conscious experiences. Those are also called memories.
Okay, let me make a point.
Yeah.
So rather than worry about equivocation on what memory might mean, let's focus on what she's going to say a little bit later, are the first level aspects of concepts of consciousness, and that is the processes, the actions. And so let me rephrase my question. Is reminiscing the verb? Is that a part of the faculty of consciousness?
Yes, but again, this is a little complicated because reminiscing is something that you could say is a conscious experience. I reminisce, but that is a conscious experience which is caused by and intimately involved with neural activity. So you can't, you can't. There is no reminiscing. There's no, Descartes was wrong. There's no consciousness floating above the body somewhere. It is intimately connected to physical processes. There is no reminiscing without physical processes. It can't happen.
Well, that's like saying there's no consciousness without a brain or a nervous system.
That's right. And it's important to say that. It's important to say that.
Is the brain the same as consciousness?
No, the brain.
Okay, so let's focus on consciousness.
Loosely speaking, the brain, because it's not the whole brain, it's some part, and the brain is only, I would put it this way, as I like to put it this way, it's the proximate cause, because the whole body, we're not brains in a vat. The whole body is involved in our nature as a conscious being. I'm sort of bracketing that for our purposes here, and to simplify it, approximate causation. The brain causes consciousness, and of course that means it's not the same thing as consciousness. Of course, if A causes B, A is not the same as B.
Okay.
So
Now
yes, the brain.
the reason
Yeah.
I think she needs faculty or something like that is because we're going to classify several different brain processes: thinking, reminiscing, feeling, sensing, perceiving, as all something that takes place in here as opposed to out there.
Yeah, but those are not brain processes, Bob. That's materialism. They're not brain. Thinking and feeling and
Very
sensing
good.
and reminiscing.
Very good. That's the point I'm
Okay,
trying to make.
yeah, they're not, but they're caused by.
Exactly.
Again, depends on what you mean. It depends on what you. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to talk about this properly. I can't do it in as simple a way as I would like. But when we talk about thinking, there is the conscious experience, and there is the neural process, and those are related, but they're two different things.
Yes.
Okay, but there wouldn't be any thinking at all in this conscious sense if there weren't the neural process. It is important to realize that the neural process is really, if you're talking about a process, something that's processing something, that's in the brain.
Okay,
so
now recall what this whole chapter is about. This whole chapter is about how do you get to know things that are concepts of consciousness, as opposed to how do you get to know things that are out there in the world. I mean, she's already covered how you get concepts like table and link and chair and furniture and things like that. And now she's going to talk about a whole different category, a whole different classification of concepts, of things that you've integrated in order to know something about the real world. But this is one level indirect from the real world, because this is how do you know what you know about the real world as opposed to
so
how do you
from
know
that
what the real world
standpoint,
is.
I think when we're talking about thinking and feeling, reminiscing, we're talking about stuff that's going on that is in awareness.
Okay, good.
It's in awareness. Now, but I do have to say, again, I have to stress that there is no such thing as a disembodied consciousness. And so you can't ignore if you can say that and talk about it that way, but you can't ignore the fact that those are intimately connected to neural processes, among other things going on in the body.
We're not doing metaphysics or physics or psychology. Well, we're doing psychology, I guess.
Yeah.
What we're doing, though, is how do you come to know the difference between fear and anger? You know it by introspection, by knowing what's going on in your
Yeah, sure. That's right. That's right.
And even though maybe they can't yet, but I'm sure that in the future, scientists will be able to tell you there's something different about the way the neurons and everything interacts. There's a difference between the way they interact when you're fearful or when you're angry. But that you don't have to know those things in order to be able to discriminate between fear and anger.
That is correct.
And what we're talking about when we talk about concepts of consciousness is all the things that you can know about without knowing about the physical causes of those things. There are physical causes, but you can discriminate between this concept of consciousness and this other concept of consciousness without knowing those causes.
Yes, I agree with that. And
it's also true. And it's also true that once you become aware of those, and once you become aware of some of the causes, they can even help you reflect back on concepts of consciousness. But that is the spiral. And right now we're focused on what's in here, not what's out there.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about that last point because I get a bad stinkling about that last point, because extrospection and introspection are not symmetrical. Introspection always has as a component, the background there's a world.
Yes.
Your consciousness is consciousness of something.
Yes.
So it's not that there's like an inner world. Again, Descartes was wrong. It's not like there's, or the representationalists are wrong. It's not that there's some inner world of consciousness. It's a separate world from the world of external reality. That's not really quite right. So I'm not gonna go further with that right now. No.
Well, I mean, Ayn Rand answers that later in this thing about.
Okay. Why don't we
like,
go ahead? We haven't gotten very far. We got one sentence.
One sentence.
Or if we've even done that. And by the way, we can always go back. I'm always in favor of going back. I do what you're calling spiraling, or what some cognitive psychologists call progressive deepening, is one of my favorite things. I love to go back to things and go around them again, and it makes people mad sometimes. Okay. My love to do that, but I'm perfectly happy to do that. So why don't we go ahead? We can come back to faculty if necessary.
I agree. Let's go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to read the second paragraph. Now I'm going to go ahead. I have some issues of even getting into this, but let's do it. Awareness is not a passive state, but an active process. Now that makes perfectly good sense to me. And I don't even, have anything, I certainly have no negative inklings there. On the lower levels of awareness, whatever those are, we're going to find out in a moment, a complex neurological process is required to enable man to experience a sensation and to integrate sensations into percepts. All right, I'm going to do what the old phenomenological philosophers would do occasionally, and bracket this. I'm not going to analyze this myself. You want to, Bob? I mean, because I have issues with the whole sensation-based perception thing, but I think it probably isn't going to matter for our purposes. So I'm just going to, as I say, bracket this and go ahead, unless you want to discuss it. Well, it's a different discussion.
Yeah.
We can always come back too, remember.
All right, but I would not like to bypass this without telling you what I think it means. And
okay.
And that is we do know, in fact, much later in life, long after we've learned the difference between tables and chairs, we do learn that the outside world has some way of impacting me, and at the least, we know that this sort of thing has this sort of effect, and we can classify things like that as sensations. So I'm not trying to differentiate. I'm not saying whether or not sensations integrate into percepts. I'm saying there are such a thing in reality which we experience, and later we can identify those as sensations. So
okay, well, if you actually, if you read Opar on this, you will find that it correctly says that we don't experience sensations when we're adults. It claims that we experience them as children or infants, and that is questionable scientifically. But he does say we don't really experience, or maybe the term was isolated sensations. So I'm not quite willing to even grant that much. But I'm not okay. But I don't think it matters. I don't think it's going to matter. I'll come back if there's trouble. But for now, I'm going to say let's go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say that.
Yeah, let's just go ahead. I'm not
trying to say we can isolate a sensation as an experience. What I'm saying is that much later, after we get all kinds of information, we can say, boy, there must have been some sort of thing affecting me. Some physical part of the real world affects some part of my body, and that's what I'm calling sensation.
Oh, well, I wouldn't use that term for that, but okay, all right. I'm gonna go ahead, and I also I guess I need to interject. I think that description is too passive, because it's not that a human being sits there and the sensations just sort of wash over him. The actual fact is, or not just human beings, animals go out and obtain information. Information is obtained by activity, but again, that's another discussion. I don't think we should do that now.
Yeah.
So let's see. Man is aware of its results, but not of the process itself. That's certainly, well, okay, when did I stop? Oh, that process is automatic. Well, it depends on what you mean by automatic. And non-volitional depends, again, I'm bracketing this because we've discussed this before. We had a whole session on this. And I think it's obvious that I choose just for example, and that's only an example, but I choose the direction of my attention, my perceptual attention. And I can do it, and it's obvious, and I think anybody can do it. So this is, let's leave this. Man is aware of its results, but not of the process itself. I think that's generally true. I don't know if you mean introspectively. Of course, we are aware. We can become aware by science of the process. But if she's referring to introspection here, that is, I would say, generally true. Okay, on the higher conceptual level, the process is psychological. That's interesting that she contrasts psychological with what? Neurological. It's an interesting contrast. Well, I'm not going to say anything about it right now. I'm just going to say it's interesting. You can say something, Bob, if you want to.
I think she's contrasting it with perceptual. Go ahead.
Okay. Conscious and volitional. Okay. In either case, awareness is achieved and maintained by continuous action. That's absolutely right. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead. Directly or indirectly, I'm going to go ahead. Directly or indirectly, every phenomenon of consciousness is derived from one's awareness of the external world. That is, there are no innate ideas. That's that idea and that all of our knowledge ultimately comes from the senses, or from perception, I'm going to say. Some object, that is, some content. Now, I want to stop right there. Because I have a little inkling about content and object. Many of the discussions in the objectivist literature basically contrast like in perceptual awareness and maybe some other kinds, conceptual awareness as well, contrast object and form. That's the contrast, object and form. There's the object of awareness and the form of awareness. And it has always seemed to me that there is a third category of importance. Object of awareness is the entity or existent in the world that you are achieving some cognition of. The form is harder to describe. Is very little described in the literature, but it's something like the sensory quality of your experience. Is it a visual quality? Is it an auditory quality? That sort of thing is what we talk about as form. There's more to say, but if Bob, you want to say more, you can. But it's a little bit vague. The object is clear; it's the thing out there in the world. And normally there's a distinction between object and form, but I would add a third category in awareness, which I use the word content for, which is what you know about the object. Because just looking at the object doesn't mean you know everything about the object. It means you may know something about it. And so I use the term content to describe what knowledge you have. If you look at a tree, let's say, by perceiving, you will learn certain things about the tree, but you don't learn everything about the tree. So I use the term content. So I'm a little worried about making content and object mean the same thing. But this is her usage, and I'll just note that I would use it differently. Some object, some content is involved in every state of awareness, right? Because consciousness is consciousness of something. I don't think I have to elaborate on that. Extrospection is a process of cognition directed outward. Well, we had that already. A process of apprehending some existence, things that exist, of the external world. And I guess by external, we mean outside of consciousness, I think.
Correct.
Introspection is a process of cognition directed inward. a process of apprehending one's own psychological actions. Now, I would stop right there because right away she has narrowed the field of what introspection refers to, or maybe not. But I mean, if everything in consciousness is an action, which you could say,
yes,
okay, then it's all right to put it that way. All right, in regard to some existence, actions in regard to some existence, the objects of the external world, such actions as thinking, feeling, reminiscing, etc. Okay, and we have these, gerunds, thinking, feeling, reminiscing. It's just interesting that she uses the gerund form, which indicates its connection to action, rather than thought.
In fact, later she
feel,
talks about
memory, so on. But anyway, okay, that's all right. It is only in relation to the external world that the various actions of a consciousness can be experienced, grasped, defined, or communicated. Well, this is more or less a reiteration of what you said before. There is no world of consciousness separate from external reality. Awareness is awareness of something. A contentless state of consciousness is a contradiction of terms. Well, that's a familiar idea also. You want to comment further on that?
Yeah. Let's pause and talk about the difference between what she's saying is true of concepts of consciousness and what she previously said is true of concepts of existence. If you will recall, first level concepts of existence are of things, entities. And in order to get to higher level concepts, there are things that you may have perceived at the same time, but you can't conceptualize until after you've conceptualized a thing.
Yep.
So, example, motion.
Right. Yeah.
Relations. You can't think about what a relation is until you know that there are things out there to be related.
Although you can perceive them.
Yes,
you can perceive them. So there's a, there's a lot to say about that first level stuff. But that's another discussion.
Well, I think we can
agree that first level concepts of consciousness are not first level concepts. Are you saying that?
No.
You're not saying that.
It's true that they're not.
Okay. Which, by the way,
but I'm saying something. I want to say something more, and that is that first level concept of consciousness is not of a thing; it's of an action, a process. That's the point I wanted to see out of this.
Not an entity. When you say a thing, you mean by that entity.
Right.
Okay.
So that's a rather striking difference between concepts of existence and concepts of consciousness.
No, it isn't, because there are concepts. There are all kinds of concepts of existence that are processes. The flow of a river, the rainfall. I mean, I could.
But those are all higher level. I'm talking about the first level.
I thought you disagreed with me that this stuff is not first level. That the concepts of consciousness are not first level.
They're not first level in concept, but they are first level. But if you separate out concepts of existence on one side, concepts of consciousness on the other, all right, we already know all concepts of consciousness are not first level in the sense that you must have a lot of concepts of existence before you can ever have concepts of consciousness. Okay.
Yeah, and that's what first level
let's look at just that class.
Non-first level.
Now let's look at just that class that is concepts of consciousness. What's the lowest level in that class? Is it an entity? No, it's a process or action.
Okay, but I don't know whether this is a quibble or an important point, but those are not first level. To say something's a lower level is not to say that it's first level. So I don't know whether there's something. I'm not sure. We'll have to see where you're going with this, but it isn't first level.
You're ignoring the point that I'm trying there is a difference between concepts of consciousness and concepts of existence that is very important. And
Okay. I
anytime
didn't
you,
disagree with that.
anytime, if you were to reduce any concept of consciousness, you're not going to get back to an entity. You're going to get back to some action that the consciousness was doing. And it's true that hold it.
I believe
Don't interrupt until I'm done. Don't interrupt
Okay.
until I'm done.
Okay, go ahead.
It's true that that consciousness had some entities out there, but in forming any concept of consciousness, you've abstracted away. Yeah, there's got to be something out there, but I'm omitting that measurement of things that are out there. I'm just talking about what the actions are, independent of what those actions had to reference in reality. Okay.
Yeah,
So
okay, but
I'm saying that's a fundamental difference between all concepts of consciousness and all concepts of existence.
okay, I don't agree with that because for simple reason, I think if you reduce, your reduction is going to include of both the, well, we'll have to, if we read on, you'll see why. It includes both the object and the process. So I'm not sure, but I don't know where, but I'm not sure that that's a problem either way. So let's go ahead.
Well, I wanted to make one other point.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, what I'm trying to do is discriminate between COC and COE, concepts of consciousness, as opposed to concepts of existence. And I've told you one thing that I think is fundamental and very important and is responsible for some of your erroneous thinking down the line. But we'll get to that later. I want to point out one other difference, which I think is you'll find much easier to agree with. And that concepts of existence have things like space, all kinds of prepositions associated with them. This thing is on top of that thing, this thing is beside that thing, etc. There is no similar thing among concepts of consciousness, but there is something by analogy. And that's the difference between in here and out there. That's the only directional thing of a concept of consciousness. Either it's in your consciousness or you're talking about external factors. So in and out have a meaning for concepts of consciousness, but of course it's different from that meaning of concepts of physical things. So when you talk about something is in the brain, you're sort of mixing things up.
No. You're the one who said it was in the brain. I said that was materialism, and I said the process.
And you're correct.
I said, excuse me, Bill. Let me stop you this time. I said that the brain processes caused. We're not identical to, but caused approximately the conscious processes. So I'm not making any such error at all. They're totally different. But consciousness is a non-physical manifestation. It is, in fact, the only non-physical manifestation that is known to in human knowledge. We don't know of any other non-physical manifestation other than consciousness, and by that I mean conscious awareness.
Okay,
yeah.
But the question "where" has a different meaning of physical things versus concepts of consciousness.
Yeah, sure.
So you can't say where is memory located, except
no. But wait a minute. It depends on which sense of the term you're using it. If you're using it in the sense of a conscious experience, that's absolutely true. But again, I just have to remind you that people do use it. Now you could object to it because people use the term memory in computers, and of course that's really not strictly speaking, that's wrong.
Yeah.
But it's okay to do it as long as you know what you're doing. And the usage of memory with respect to the brain is similar. I think it's better, though, better than it's similar in that they're talking there in the brain. When you talk about a memory, when you refer to a memory trace, would be the one way of referring to it. There, you're referring to something physical that has location. We don't know what it is. It's because it seems to be. It's not, in general, it's not located in one little place. You know, your memory of a particular thing is somewhat distributed. And anyway, we don't understand enough about the how it works to locate it specifically, but it's in your head. That stuff is in your head, and you can prove that it's in your head easily enough. So but that's a different, that we have to distinguish that from memory as a conscious experience, which, just as you said, does not have a physical location. It's not a physical entity. It's not a physical existent. It is not physical. It's conscious. It's a whatever you want to call consciousness. It's non-physical in its nature, and hard to describe, but it doesn't have a location. So we're agreeing with that, I think.
Yeah. So okay, so we can probably go beyond our first 3 paragraphs.
Can we do that, Steve?
Hey,
you want to do something, Steve? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question of reason as a concept. It's kind of it has existential and intellectual components. Now, how would you place that in this discussion? It's a more sophisticated version of our knowledge, so it's not really.
Well, I got to think. Are you asking me, is reason a concept of consciousness? I don't know if we're ready to get into this. Is a sort of question. Yeah. I would probably like to.
Like it has an aspect of both. So.
I think.
Yeah, I think we have to go further.
Yeah, I agree. So, Steve, don't forget it. But let's postpone that and get a little further in the text, because well, it's a hard question. Let's go on to the next. Can we get to the next set of paragraphs?
Yep. Let me get that.
Because we're not going to get much further than we're not going to get that far. Well, we got things to discuss. It's a rich field of discussion. Let's face it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead here. This is from page 39. So, in the realm of introspection, the concretes, the units, which are integrated into a single concept, are the specific instances of a given psychological process. Okay. Now, again, with the word psychological, she uses for, okay. The measurable attributes of a psychological process are its object or content. And I wouldn't use those as equivalent, but she does, and that she's entitled to her usage. Object or content and its intensity. The measurable attributes of a psychological process are its object or content and its intensity. Now, if you think of examples, the examples that come to mind immediately are different for object and intensity, because intensity suggests to me things like emotions or pains, and object suggests to me things like perceptions of a tree or a car or a river or something. So those two, of course, do go together. There's intensity in both cases, but it's a little more it's a little hard. It's harder for me to instantly, anyway, to put those two things together. Anyway, I think that the measurable attributes is, by measurable, by the way, she means measurable in the, what is the term that they use in statistics for in the ordinal sense of measurement, not in the interval or ratio sense. We're not measuring consciousness in kilograms or seconds or something. We're measuring it that this process is more intense than that process, that you can order the processes in intensity, at least with respect to that.
As a point of order,
yes,
just to orient oneself, we covered 3 paragraphs.
Yep.
And now we're skipping to paragraph 11. This is paragraph 11, 12, and 13.
Yeah.
Did I go too far?
Now,
Then we have the,
we probably don't have those because of the
yeah, yeah.
But there may be some very valuable material in there in order to understand what we're now talking about.
Possibly. And, that's, in anything you're reading. So, well, Ayn Rand generally gives, maybe always, but generally gives you what you need to know before she tells you something, that for which it's needed. But in general, in reading, you very frequently have to go back because the authors in general do not give you their material in the precise logical order necessary to convey it properly. So sometimes you have to go back in. I mean, that's very common. It's not common in Ayn Rand. I don't know if it exists at all, but it's certainly not common. Anyway, we're reading as if we're reading somebody else who might well give us those 3 paragraphs later in the text. So if we don't have the text, we don't have all the text. I don't know. We have to do the best we can, Bob.
Yeah. So I just wanted to set the context.
Yeah. Okay. So here we are. I'm going to go on to the next paragraph unless you want to comment on
just an overall
instances of
comment.
Process.
Sorry? An overall comment.
Yes.
Previously,
we want to give a gist. Give us a gist.
Previously, we learned about units and attributes with respect to things out there. Now she's saying, let's talk about how we get units and what the attributes of units are when we talk about concepts of consciousness. That is, things in here as opposed to things out there. So that's where we are now. Okay.
All right. And again, from my standpoint, the things in here are conscious experiences, such as thoughts, feelings, pains, emotions.
But recall that she said,
and
she'll say later, that what you just named are mental entities. And your lower level concepts of consciousness are not entities, they're processes. So she's saying the units are the process for these things.
So, thinking, feeling, paining. Is there a word for feeling pains? Feeling pains.
No,
that's fine. I'm okay with that. Now, I have to say about mental entity, she uses that term with great trepidation.
Yes.
Because she's quite aware that there are no such things in a literal sense as mental entities. Yep. It is something she has to use because we don't have, at this time, we don't have the right language. But she is quite clear that she doesn't mean by it what the fundamental sense of entity. So I'm not sure where that goes. I'm not sure that we can apply the exact ideas that we would apply to real entities to a mental entity such as, I don't know what constitutes a mental entity. Is a concept a mental entity?
Well, she talks about the products of these actions being the result. They're a concept of consciousness, and the product is like an entity.
Okay, well, let me take, we're obviously not going to get much further because we're going to have to switch over here. We're not going to get much further than we've gotten. So let me ask you this. If I have an emotion of fear, I feel fear, okay? Process or entity or object, or what is that? When that feeling of fear, when I see the, I'm on the savannah and I see the lion is starting to run after me. So I feel fear. What is that?
Well,
is that process?
The feeling is the process. The fear is the result.
What's the result? What
Fear.
Does he mean by the result?
What can I mean other than fear?
Okay, so the experience of fear is the result. Is that what you're saying? It's a tricky question. I mean, I'm not trying to be tricky. It's a question of some difficulty to discriminate there. What would constitute the process, and what constitutes some kind of mental entity, if there is one there. There is a mental entity there, because I wouldn't. The fear is a process itself. When I'm experiencing fear, that is a process itself, but it's also, in some sense, I don't know if mental entity is the right term. I don't know.
Well, how would you form the concept of fear? You would have several experiences where you felt.
Yeah, I would say, when I
the
saw
thing I felt is in
Yeah.
common among these, and it's different from what I felt in these other cases. So I will now form the concept of fear as being the result of when I had feelings like this. So the feeling is the primary with respect to this, and the fear is I've now formed a concept based on similarities and differences among those different actions of my consciousness, which was feeling fear. And I say, the thing that was the same in those is that I felt this. This I'm going to call fear.
Yes. Okay, that's fine. That doesn't answer my question, but I agree with it. It's certainly agreeable. Yes.
Well, I
don't
think
know.
it also illustrates the point we were making earlier, and that is that the lower level thing is the action, and the product, which we can now talk about as products like that are results of physiological action, psychological actions. Those products, we could say, that's a mental entity. That is, it's something that resulted from the mind acting this way.
So on that view, are we saying the fear was the product?
Yes.
And what was the action?
Feeling fear. But you didn't know what you were feeling.
Now that leaves me, there's got to be some other way, because to me, feeling fear is what fear is. That's what fear is. I feel fear.
Yeah, but how do you know that? How do you form the concept of fear?
Just as you said, I have had various experience. I felt fear here. I felt it there. I felt it there.
No. You had feelings here. You had feelings there, and you contrast those feelings with these other feelings over here.
Sure. Yeah.
Over here, I felt happy. Over here, I felt. What's the similar? That's feeling. That's fear. That's what I felt.
Yeah.
That's the same among these feelings.
Right.
As opposed to happiness as being the same among some other people.
I'm okay with that. It doesn't get to the distinction between. That does not get to the distinction between feeling it and let's see, what am I trying to do here? There's the mental entity, if there is one, versus the process. Are we talking about when I say I fear something? Is that a process or not, or something else?
Let me make a different point.
By the way, wait a minute. Let me just stop for a second here. We have to turn over to. Is this the point where we need to turn over to Clubhouse, Steve? Or do we have a Clubhouse?
I sent a message to Dylan, and he hasn't responded. But Dylan, we have one. Yes, he says there's one scheduled. Yeah.
So we ought to move over there for now. Let us say that in 2 weeks we will try to finish as much of this process as we can. Maybe we can even scare up more material, fill in some of those gaps that we weren't able to. We'll see. But in any case, we've gotten as far as we've gotten, and it's worth it to look at this in depth. It is absolutely worth it, I think. So we'll do that. Continue with that.
Yeah, maybe a series of concepts of consciousness.
Bob?
Yeah.
You're not going to run away anywhere, are you? You're not going to.
I've eaten already.
You've eaten already. He eats once every 2 weeks, you see. So okay. So why don't we go ahead, go over to Clubhouse, and we'll continue from there, because we're still discussing stuff. Yeah, so let's do that, Eric. Yeah, sorry, Bob.
I've got to go get my phone.
Get your phone? Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll
Okay.
hold the fort while you do that. Okay. Is that, Steve, you can end the festivities if you want to for here. And we invite everyone to go over to Clubhouse, where it will get even rougher. If you can imagine such.
Okay, see ya.
Yep.